All right, they are the one team that can say they defeated the eventual national champions last season and very impressively on the road. Mark Rogers TV talking ACC, and we bring in Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC to break down the Hokies of Virginia Tech. Okay, Mike, it's the Hokies coming off 7-6. They did win a bowl game over Cincinnati in pretty dominant fashion in the second half. If they somehow could have duplicated that Ohio State effort time and time again, then maybe they wouldn't have lost 6 games. But they instantly lost to East Carolina. Then it kind of unraveled with only a 3-5 showing in the ACC. So let's start on offense, and let's start with Michael Brewer, who pulled off a heroic effort against Ohio State. He was on his back constantly in that game, but really against a tough pass rush, held in there and made some remarkable throws. But he turned the ball over a little too much, especially in the first half of the season.
Yeah, the coaching staff actually talked about how big of a toll that Ohio State game played on the rest of the season because the team just, I don't know, a lot of injuries and a lot of guys were beat up after that game. And they had a tough opponent the following week there with East Carolina. They really, they'd sling the ball around, and Ruffin McNeil always has them ready to play. So that was a tough opponent coming right back after that Ohio State victory. But Michael Brewer, 59% of his passes completed last year, 2,700 yards. He threw 11 interceptions in the first 6 games, but he only had 4 interceptions the rest of the season. So it was kind of a tale of 2 halves there for Michael Brewer last season. But he finished the year with 18 total touchdowns, and a lot of it, is attributed to lack of a solid running game and an offensive line that was constantly shuffling around. So he's got some playmakers there on offense, and we'll just have to see if the offensive line can play a little bit better this year in protecting him and establishing a better run game.
So, yeah, let's talk about the running game and also talk about the weapons he has on the outside, because this Virginia Tech team hasn't necessarily had that guy in the backfield in recent years, where we're accustomed to an elite runner in the backfield kind of carrying the load. But down the stretch, these 2 kids, and I remember seeing them late against Virginia, and I believe it was Marshawn Williams or it was J.C. Coleman, I think, who actually was the guy that got the bulk of the carries the last couple of games of the season and turned in a couple 100-yard games. So set us up with what they've got coming back at running back.
They're a pretty stacked backfield. Now it all starts with the run game. J.C. Coleman finished the season strong last year. Actually didn't play a huge role until late in the year, but he came on strong and ended up being the leading rusher after Marshawn Williams and Shy McKenzie succumbed to ACL injuries. But J.C. Coleman, 157 yards and 1 touchdown there in the Military Bowl against Cincinnati, was named the MVP there. And he rushed for 467 yards over the final 4 games, and he was pretty solid there down the stretch for him. And he entered fall camp with co-number 1 recognition there, Trey Edmonds there starting. And Trey Edmonds, he ran for 675 yards and 10 touchdowns 2 years ago as a redshirt freshman, but missed most of last season with a couple different injuries. He had a hurt foot, and then he broke his collarbone on kind of a freak injury. So he just didn't really get the reps last year that he wanted. He wasn't really on the field, ended the season with only 97 yards rushing. But if you remember a couple of years ago when Tech opened up with Alabama, Edmonds ran the ball very well. He had broke that really long, I think it was like 73-yard touchdown run in that game, got Virginia Tech on the board, and he looked really good as a redshirt freshman. And he looked like he could maybe be that guy that Tech's been lacking there for the last couple seasons. But he's going to have to stay healthy. I think he and J.C. Coleman can provide a nice 1-2 punch, especially since Marshawn Williams and Shy McKenzie are coming off of ACL injuries, and neither of them are at 100% yet. I think one of them could actually be a candidate for a red shirt, to be quite honest with you, just because the offensive the backfield is so stacked. But as we saw last year, injuries happen, and one of these guys, that played such a big role last year could absolutely slide in. And they also got a playmaker, Trayvon McMillan. He's going to be a freshman this year, and he's a big play guy, and he kind of was a home run threat throughout spring camp, and they like the prospects of him getting some carries too. So when you work in 5 guys, it's pretty tough to pick out one specific guy at running back that could actually be the lead back in this offense.
Isaiah Ford caught 56 passes last year. Cam Phillips with 40. Bucky Hodges, one of the better tight ends in the ACC, if not all of college football. I've got him rated in the top 10. He's coming off a 45-catch season. So kind of set us up for the passing game. We talked about Brewer, but really the offense has been a little bit void of anybody on the outside that's been really dynamic in recent years.
Yeah, like you said, Bucky Hodges has kind of emerged. He's a big play target. I mean, he's a converted quarterback. He's got a lot of speed, and he's a real tall target, 6'5", 6'6", and 45 catches last year, 526 yards, and 7 touchdowns as a redshirt freshman. Shattered pretty much every tight end record that Virginia Tech had there for freshmen, and he's a big-time target. He is the go-to guy, but they, like you said, with Ford and Phillips there, they got 2 promising sophomores. Like you said, combined 96 catches, over 1,200 yards, and 9 touchdowns between the 2 of them. So hopefully they can bring an added production there this year and maybe take a step forward even after the strong freshman campaigns they had.
Okay, I don't know if you've got anything for us on the offensive line, any changes there, experience, production coming back, because obviously those guys make it all work.
Yeah, they seem to make it all work. I mean, they shuffle guys around a lot. They lost David Wang, who was he seemed like he was at Tech forever. Ended up playing 6 seasons because he just kept getting hurt and getting medical red shirts. But he was the guy there playing guard and played some center and was shuffled around a ton. But he's gone. Lawrence Gibson has gone to the NFL. He's playing for the Cowboys now, and he was a late-round draft pick. But they have a couple guys, Wyatt Teller. He's a converted defensive lineman, 2 offensive linemen, and he's just huge. I mean, he's 6'7", just a big guy, really bullying people around, and the coaching staff really likes his intensity. They also have Augie Conti. He's played for a couple of years now at guard, and he has to get a little bit more consistent in the run game there for Tech to succeed, because he's had some small issues where he'll miss a block here or there and the play gets blown up in the backfield. But he's so big and he's such a hard worker that the offensive line coach, Stacy Searles, is really thrilled with his production. So we'll just see, throughout if the fall camp production carries over into the season, and if the offensive line can, just improve the rushing, because at 9-3 last year for Tech, when they ran for over 100 yards, and they lost to Miami 30-6, so that would be a lone aberration, whether you like it or not. But losses to Wake and Georgia Tech could have been avoided. It was a 6-3 slugfest there in the Wake Forest game, that overtime game late in the season. It was one of the ugliest football games I've ever witnessed. But that Georgia Tech game earlier in the season, it began that string of losses, or it was the second of that string of losses for Tech right after the Ohio State game, and Tech threw, Michael Brewer threw a late interception, and they had some questionable play calling there. They should have been running the ball. They were up a couple touchdowns with about 4 or 5 minutes to go and ended up blowing that game. So they could have easily been 11-1 last year when running for over 100 yards. So it all starts with that run game.
Okay, let's get to the defense. This is the real good news for Hokie fans. Just to highlight the high point of last season, it all stemmed from the defense. Brewer had an exceptional game in Columbus, but it was really defense. You could say on one hand, J.T. Barrett's second start at Ohio State, he wasn't acclimated to the offense. But what really happened there, and Urban Meyer described it after the game and in the post-game news conference, and even going into the next week, what really happened was Bud Foster came up with a defense that Ohio State had never seen before. And because of the talent at cornerback, they could play man-to-man on either side, lock down Ohio State's wide receivers, who we saw what they did against Alabama and Oregon down the stretch. Exceptional wide receivers, and they locked them down one-on-one, and that allowed them just to flood the box and just rush the passer and outnumber Ohio State's offensive linemen, just come after the quarterback. And that was pretty much spelled the defensive effort there, that they are that good at the cornerback position and then have that type of talent that they can clog up the run and let everybody run free after the passer. And that's what got it done against Ohio State. Of course, they can't score most of the time for the offense, but if the offense can stabilize things, get the ground game going, and Brewer can have a more efficient season, cut down on the interceptions, wow. With this defense, man, highlight this defense for us, because it could be special.
It could absolutely be special. And with all the issues they had last year with injuries on the defensive side of the football, they still finished the season 21st in total defense. So 21st in total defense is kind of an off season for Bud Foster, but we'll give him the benefit of the doubt due to the fact they were still a top 25 defense with numerous injuries across the board. Kendall Fuller played much of the season with a fractured wrist. You have Brandon Faison, who missed most of last season with he had a shin fracture and ended up getting a medical red shirt after a really strong freshman campaign in 2013. But he returns, and Kendall Fuller returns, and he's fully healthy. 54 tackles last year, including 4.5 for loss, had 2 interceptions, 15 pass breakups, and a forced fumble. Definition of an All-American defensive back, and he's for sure a first-round pick if he stays healthy this year, and he'll be gone to the NFL pretty quickly. But at the safety position, they suffered a sizable loss with C.J. Rivas losing out on a student conduct appeal and ended up being dismissed from school. He's actually now at a junior college. He just ended up enrolling a couple of weeks ago. But they're going to replace him with Donovan Riley and Desmond Fry. Desmond Fry would most likely be the starter if the season began today, according to the coaching staff. But there's going to be a lot of rotation there in the secondary, especially at the safety position. Chuck Clark, who played a pretty big role for Tech last year, especially in run defense, he'll be starting at safety. Desmond Fry and Riley will be alternating there at the rover position in all likelihood. But there's a good chance that you'll also see some young guys there in the defensive backfield with Greg Stroman, who had a pretty sizable bowl game there. Played on both sides of the football, ran some end arounds, had an interception there for Tech. So I think there's a chance for the secondary to be one of the best in the country. And you couple that with a defensive line that is the best in the ACC. Daddy Nicholas, Kenny Canham, 2 all-ACC defensive ends, 18.5 sacks, 33 tackles for loss between the 2 of them last year. Daddy Nicholas brings more speed and highlight plays, but Kenny Canham, in my opinion, is the better all-around defensive end, but you can't go wrong with either one of those guys. And on the interior defensive line, you have Corey Marshall and Luther Matty. Corey Marshall is actually returning to the team on a full-time basis now. He actually took some time off for some personal reasons, but he's back, and he's a really big run stopper there in the middle. And Luther Matty is coming off of an injury for a 5th year. Coming into this year as a 5th-year senior, and he's a big-time player as well. So they're returning a lot of guys there on defense. They lose 2 safeties in the secondary, but they're replacing them with guys that had a lot of playing time last year. And they're losing Chase Williams at middle linebacker, but Dion Clark is returning, and Andrew Motuapuaka, who struggled a little bit last year, but when coming in to replace Chase Williams when he was out due to injury. But Motuapuaka is a more than capable player. He was a highly thought-of recruit, and as long as he takes the next step in his progression into a pretty good all-around ACC linebacker, they should be okay on defense there at the linebacker position. So it's going to be a pretty strong group there for Bud Foster, and if they all stay healthy, they're going to be very good.
Okay, Labor Day night in Blacksburg, Ohio State, defending national champion, comes to town. I think the national perception is that Ohio State is going to enact revenge for what happened last season, come in with a vengeance, and just smack Virginia Tech around. I don't see that in any way, shape, or form. I think Ohio State's a decidedly better team across the board because of the offensive skill positions and everything that they have. They can certainly match Virginia Tech defensively, and then they've got so much more skill position players on offense. But it's not a blowout by any stretch of the imagination from where I'm sitting, and the game's at night. It's in Blacksburg, and I got to think that Virginia Tech's coaching staff has been telling these kids all summer, you beat this football team, so you know you can beat them. And on top of that, nobody's giving you a chance to beat them again. And that the crowd's going to be into it. It's a night game. It's going to be electric atmosphere. And on top of that, Ohio State's missing Joey Bosa, possibly the best defensive player in the country. And now they just lost the other day another wide receiver to injury on top of the 3 wide receivers lost due to suspension. So they've got their 4 best wide receivers not even playing in this game. So that's going to be difficult. So if Virginia Tech can beat Ohio State back-to-back years, that's going to be something else. They've got Furman, okay. Then a game at Purdue, which I got to credit Virginia Tech for scheduling another Power 5 game, although Purdue's the worst team in the Big Ten. They go to East Carolina. You talked about the issues that they've had with the Pirates in the past, and East Carolina, certainly formidable. What I'd like to highlight here, Mike, and then I'll turn it over to you, is that, of course, playing in the Coastal Division, it matters a whole lot who you play in the Atlantic Division. So while Miami and Georgia Tech draw Clemson and Florida State, for Virginia Tech, it's NC State and BC. That, I believe, is a huge advantage and may be the deciding factor if they stabilize the offense to getting into this race.
Yeah, I think they're the favorite in the Coastal, as a matter of fact. I mean, that game with Georgia Tech there late in the season on November 12th, it's going to be a Thursday night there at Bobby Dodd Stadium in Atlanta, and that's going to decide the Coastal, in my opinion, if all things, go according to plan for both Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech. The Ohio State game is going to be extremely tough for Virginia Tech to win just because of the talent level of Ohio State, but we saw it happen last year and nobody expected it, and Ohio State's missing a bunch of starters. It is a night game in Blacksburg. The crowd will be into it. It's the opener. Students will be going nuts, and it's a pretty tough environment there at night in Lane Stadium and just during the day. I mean, it's just a tough place to play, as tough as any in the ACC, in my opinion. So you have the Ohio State game, which essentially is a loss to toss up. If Virginia Tech wins that game, I think they put themselves in great shape for the rest of the season, because you look at the game the following week against Furman, you can chalk that up as a win in all likelihood. I mean, they had the James Madison debacle there in 2010, but in all likelihood, they'll beat Furman, you would think. But, they have a strange game at Purdue that, is not usually scheduled. I wouldn't put Tech on upset alert by any means, but Purdue will be an interesting game just because they don't see them very often. And Purdue is Purdue should improve this year, but they are the worst team in the Big Ten. So I don't anticipate Tech having much problem there. Usually I would give East Carolina some credence because they've just played Tech so tough. You saw them come into Blacksburg last year, the week after Ohio State, and beat Tech. But East Carolina's, they just lost their starting quarterback, Kurt Benkert, to a torn ACL. So he's out for the season. And now they're working in a new quarterback extremely late in camp, a couple weeks before the opener. So I think East Carolina will have a pretty tough time beating Virginia Tech this year. The Pitt game is interesting because Pitt always gives Virginia Tech some trouble, but usually when they give Tech trouble, it's a game away at Pittsburgh. Usually when Tech plays Pitt at home, it's not as stringent of a task, but Pittsburgh's going to be a tough offense to defend, but Virginia Tech's defense certainly up to the task there. NC State, I think they'll be pretty good. That's the one team in the Atlantic that Virginia Tech drew. That's, while they're not Clemson or Florida State, I still think that NC State come in on a Friday night, could play Virginia Tech pretty tough there at home, and NC State will travel well. Raleigh's not that far from Blacksburg, so they'll travel well to that game. And the NC State fans in that one corner of the stadium, I think, will be into it. And I think NC State's going to have a pretty good team. Jacoby Brissett at quarterback, obviously, is a very good player, and nice little dual threat quarterback they have there. At Miami, essentially Miami's a toss-up game because you don't know what Miami's got this year. I mean, they seem to consistently underperform, but if they perform up to expectations with Brad Kaya at quarterback, they're going to be a very good team. But you look at the rest of the schedule, Duke's going to take a step back. BC, I don't think BC will be nearly as good. They're losing Tyler Murphy at quarterback, but they have John Hillman at running back. He's a pretty good player entering his sophomore year. North Carolina, if their defense improves and their offense stays putting up, video game numbers, North Carolina could be a tough game. But again, that's another game that Tech has at home. And then you have Virginia, who Tech has handled time and time again over the last 10 or 15 years. So it's an interesting schedule, top to bottom. We'll kind of have to see how it plays out. I just don't – it could be anywhere from, an 11-1 or a 10-2 to an 8-4, 9-3, in my opinion. I think it's more likely to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 9-3 just because Virginia Tech always seems to lose to a team in the middle of the season that they probably should beat. So whether that's a Miami or an NC State kind of remains to be seen. So we'll see.
Yeah, if you just look at the chalk, Ohio State and Georgia Tech are going to be favorites unless something happens by November 12th that's unexpected. But if the chalk holds and Virginia Tech's as good as we think they are, Georgia Tech's as good as we think they're going to be, then Tech's going to be a minor favorite at home. Ohio State's a pretty substantial favorite out of the gate. And then they trip up one other time. That spells 9-3. I think that would be the safe pick, but then again, who knows what's going to happen here. All right, we got Mike McDaniel on the line talking some Virginia Tech football. Mike from inside the ACC, breaking down the Hokies. Thanks, Mike.
Hey, thanks, Mark.